just turn it over to the audience for questions, but also, like, if you have experiences that can open up the dialogue about writing and criticism of this practice, that's totally relevant too. So we take it away. Does anyone?
But can we respond to you guys?
Yeah, just for 1 second. Go right ahead.
I'm sorry, I'll just feel like I'm on a roll.
No, but I just want to point out something that I just was really intrigued by, and is this idea of, and it's something I think about too, is this idea of the before, during, and after of criticism. At what point, like, that so many of these pieces are in process that, you know, I think about, like, I knew what Mark Tribe was up to, you know, really early on in the project, and had already kind of gotten money, all of this stuff. And I thought to myself, like, I should have written this, you know, 2 days into what I knew. Like, what kind of practice would it be to write as a critic while someone's in process? And I know a lot of people in this room are teachers. We do that when we're doing studio visits or with our students, where we're like, don't do that, like, or have, you know, kind of critical discussions. But as a critic, I think it's important, and I was really brought up sharply by someone in Chicago who said, you got to talk about all this in public. Like, you know, behind the scenes, intervening into certain people's practices that you have problems with. You need to do it in public. Don't just take them aside. If they have a public platform, it's your responsibility to also contribute to the conversation. She was talking about a conference, but she also then later said, and in print. So I just thank you for focusing so much on the duration question, because I also think it's about when do we intervene in a project if we have really critical things to say about it, or even augmenting, you know, if we want to be helpful. If my goal is to think about ways to write something that would make better social practice projects exist in the world, and have them have better ideas about what is politics, or, you know, I don't know about better, I'm sorry about that, but just, if that really is my goal as a critic, wouldn't it make sense that I would also want to get in there early, you know, the during, the after? So that's a question to everyone else, because I think that sometimes we are privy to these projects not after they're dead, but during.
That's where it can be so important to maybe draw from ethnographic practice. And we've been kind of following this idea of, like, the embedded critic or embedded journalist as we're approaching this project. And so just trying to spend as much time as we can observing and talking to people and doing interviews, I think, is going to be key.
There's also, on our side, there's an interest in seeing what's the aftermath of the project, and that's why we're also spending time with them now, but we want to go back a couple months after it's finished and talk with the community and spend time there and just seeing what's the aftermath of it in their words, and insert that in our analysis. We see this as a year-long observation project that will somehow take us to places we don't know yet. We may have our intuitions now, and we do have them, but it's important that we let it unfold through time, through interviews, conversations, and just opening our eyes and seeing.
I mean, I think I like what you were saying in terms of the process of working alongside it and what's your goal, really. Like, as a critic, if you're talking about this work, you're positioning it, and it's pretty charged, I think, however you enter the process, whether it's before, during, or after. But so much of it, I think you're right, is if the work that it's doing is in this sort of process-based way and it can be adapted, then I think that it's really necessary as soon as you feel that it's imperative to speak, that you speak then. Otherwise, this sort of, like, you know, the friend of the artist is, well, as a critic, you're sort of building something with them. You're in conversation, whether they elect to have you in that conversation or not. You sort of decide you're part of it. And if you're going to sort of criticize it as a takedown, you know, sometimes that's necessary, and that, you know, can happen after the fact. But really, if you're trying to help the project, if you're trusting that the artist is working towards something and would benefit from it, or the community would benefit from it, or the field would benefit from it, then I think, I really like that. idea of when you feel it, you should say it. And in terms of platforming, I feel like Field Journal is an online publication. What we do is online publication, and I think that that's a place that can happen as well. You can do it immediately, and you can sort of work outside of the sort of system of publication to do that work.
I actually have a question for you, because I'm really intrigued by this idea of criticism for a community, or for the community that you're maybe writing about. And I'm wondering if you have any examples of when that has worked out, or how that can be encouraged.
Yeah.
Because I think it's an interesting idea. I don't want to put you on the spot, but...
I think for me, it's pretty specifically like I'm speaking from a position of being a writer, but also being an editor and a publisher, and that all of that is kind of interconnected, because it's making decisions about what you talk about, how you talk about it, and what you're trying to build. I think for me specifically, coming from St. Louis, what St. Louis means right now in symbolically but practically, there were a lot of moments, and I'm not sure how to do it as a critic necessarily, and when that shifts from being a critic to being a person who is in the midst of crisis, and I think that we're all in the midst of crisis all the time, and that's why a lot of us make the work that we do, or care about this, or come to convene because we want to further that. So I think that it's, for me, it was kind of choosing to speak about that regularly, and I wasn't sure when it was criticism, when it was not criticism, but I did feel like it was necessary in terms of an artist's practice.
That brings me to when you're saying criticism of the community. A lot of criticism and academic writing is for academics and critics, and completely alienates anyone who doesn't have that knowledge. So what do you all think about that, and is there a way to bring it to a broader audience without dumbing it down?
I think at the journal, we're sort of exploring this other modality, which is in some ways about storytelling, first and foremost, and then building criticism through storytelling. So we're thinking about the journalistic apparatus. We're thinking about telling the what of projects, if not just the why and the how and the symbolic things that inform it, and using that to then complexify projects. I think it's very different in some ways to have the long form or the space of the journal as opposed to what James is doing, which has this different kinds of urgency, and yet I think what we're trying to explore is this different time space of the journal that still, it comes out, like when it's ready, it's ready and it goes online, which is exciting. But it sort of does seek to look into this mode of academic art history, but sort of crack it open a little bit in a bit of a slower frame. But I think for all of us, and for Grant certainly, a practice that's not obtuse and that is invitational and accessible is certainly part of the exploration. And we're not getting it right every time. It's issue 1, but working through that and finding ways to guide and coach writers and to create structures so that we can be in those projects from the beginning in long-form ways is certainly part of the the ethos of the journal.
I basically have the same question, just like how you all think about audience, and like in particular, like how you think about language, which is obviously that question, but also just like distribution models. Like one of the things, it's I'm just thinking about like the idea of putting it out on the internet. That's like open, but that's not specific enough. Like I just wanted to push you all a little bit to talk to expand on that, like how you really think about language and who your audience is, and whether or not the kind of like. I guess for me it was interesting when both of you were talking, I didn't hear very much about output. Like what is it really going to look like? Does it include, that first person language participants? Like how do you sort of work through all that stuff, I guess?
Sure. Well, one thing I've been thinking a lot about is interviews and how to do interviews with people, and then how that becomes part of the writing itself. And so I think that can be something really interesting as a kind of output. And in terms of what we are working towards, I think it will be like an article or essay for but then it could be broken down into shorter forms as well.
There's also, I think, in our specific project, because there's an interest in really understanding what's going on in a part of California in terms of the new political direction that side of the state is taking. There's an interest in our side in making it accessible to publics beyond the specificity of our history. We think there's a certain social responsibility of the art critic that points in that direction. And it'll be published in different times and field, and maybe in a longer article and broken into smaller parts, but we're still a bit early in the process. It's good to think about that.
Two quick thoughts is one is I think that the term I is something that we're trying to not be afraid of, and I know that for practitioners that's like a really old story, but for the academy they're just like coming around to not fearing the I and trying to break that down without really centralizing that subject. Also, I think just coming from a department of art history, theory, and criticism with sort of a strong relationship with an MFA program and a practice PhD, for us it's really important to work across disciplines. So we're curating a series of conversations with sociologists, anthropologists to really start exchanging methodologies. We feel like art history has really been like sequestered and cloistered, and that part of opening it up is really confronting the boundaries and practices of different disciplines and trying to learn of how to integrate and also introduce some of the practices that come out of art methodologies to those other disciplines.
It's a great question. I think that, for me, I'm in the place of a CV that needs academic peer-reviewed journals. But I have to say that I wrote Vulnerable Accumulation for for the people in my collective, for the people that I organized politically with, and for other people who were collaborating. And I worked hard to try to not have it be, but I was experimenting with the idea of can it be all things to all people? Can I do it all in one thing? And which formats, which places does that circulate in? And I'm not sure how that works. I think that it ends up for me is that the audience I'm always thinking about first is the people I work with. It's almost like, and that they're friends and they tell two friends and they tell two friends, right? And so because I don't have the imagination for more than that. I'm always surprised when someone has read something I've written, always. I really am. And that I didn't send them, And, but that's also kind of the excitement. I think that I don't have any, I have had fantasies for a long time of writing about what social practice can bring back to organizing. I have had fantasies about that, and I don't have fantasies about that anymore. I just don't. Why? Because quite honestly, the politics in social practice art are so dissolute. There was a moment when they didn't appear to be, when they were asking really profound questions about the relation, bringing into this encounter with can art be about social engagement, can art be about things, and it was transforming that discussion about social practice isn't about things, it produces things. That was a moment of something politically exciting. Now I am the issues in movement building need a kind of political specificity and training that I don't find in social practice. And that's I'm not trying to say that we need a cadre of experts who've been studied. It's just more you need to be in these stupid meetings, and they're not stupid, but you need to be in these meetings and you need to learn how to understand what a person's politics are. That's what the movement needs. And you learn it in social practice, but you leave disgusted At least I do. I'm sorry, none of you do. But I leave disgusted to find out what the person's politics are. And then my friends, who I already knew their politics and love them and think they're awesome. So, yeah, I'll stop there before I get sayed more.
Yeah, it just sounds, actually listening to this, maybe an area that could open up this sort of notion of like a sequestered zone for art history and our critical writing is just traditional news reportage. I mean, a lot of what you're traditional news reportage, a lot of what you're discussing is what war reporters do when they do long form stories going abroad. They also have to navigate being kind of amidst a population that they then report on. They have to deal with the durational element of the before, in the middle, and the end. And our criticism is always, again, in terms of it sort of separating itself, it's sort of even linguistically set itself aside from the quote-unquote traditionalist and populist realm of just news reportage. But in fact, social practice may be precisely the invitation to become more reporters on this subject than we've ever been, maybe in art. So that may be an area to look to for guidelines and ethics.
Yeah, I think I just want to add to that. I think journalism is certainly a big inspiration for the journal, but I also think one of the questions for social practice as opposed to political practice is then how does the poetry enter back in a way that's like constructive and active, that is in some ways introduces the art part in a way that's still relevant and cutting.
But there was, can I just super fast?
That's a great comment. I totally agree that journalism is a practice we pay attention to permanently, but there's also, we don't want to forget about a certain Marxist tradition that has been paying attention to the responsibility of the critic for almost 2 centuries, and what's our role in that tradition, and what's our role in recovering those readings and making them pertinent for the time of crisis that we're embedded in. And that links with the responsibility of the journalist as a practice, and we take a lot from that. But there's also a tradition within academia that we feel it's urgent to revisit and bring back.
So never forget that Marx started as a journalist.
Yeah.
So yeah. I agree, but I just wanted to say he was also.
Yeah. There's a hand.
Yes.
It strikes me that there is a difference between socially engaged art criticism and criticism of socially engaged art. And arguably, if you look back to the history of art criticism, where criticism emerges in the form of very subversive pamphlets to take down or, you complicate what was happening in the French Academy and the Salon system. I'm interested in how your collective, but also art criticism today, can be engaged in this history of art criticism as potentially something that can be subversive or socially engaged.
I think that in the selection of articles that come out in the first issue, there's been a permanent concern in choosing those who speak of the series of forces and relations behind the projects, and where writers have had a permanent commitment to make them visible. In that line, I think we're closer to, or maybe closer to the French, like what you classify as a French classic critical tradition of dismantling the RPs. But I don't think there's such a dichotomy anymore. It's not so easy to tell to both.
But I think something else that we're really interested in with the journal is not like working from a place of practice before theory, or the idea that the practice should guide the theory in some way. So then, of course, you have to do a lot of observation and on-the-ground research and talking to people before you start with these, like critical theories from the 20th century.
The use of social media in a very immediate way, and as critics responding to a particular event or something that is more durational, if you feel like you are a critic as you're posting something more casually, as an attendee or participant, do you feel like you're wearing that hat? I mean, as an arts organizer myself, I know that any response that I give to something, I'm giving it under this umbrella. But I'm kind of curious about that, and when you feel it's more important to do something in a longer form, or that you can kind of chip away at something as it hits you.
Can I complicate that question a little bit? If you're observing for 100 hours or more, like are you waiting till the end to share with those people?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Thanks. But I think not exactly. We're going to be taking lots of field notes. I think that's our main form of documenting as we're observing this practice unfold. But I also think that we're constantly in conversation with the people that are part of this project. So I feel like it's not going to be exactly like a secret in the end, like what we think about it and how we're going to respond to the project. You know, like it's a conversation between us and them in the end.
Our analysis gets informed through time. What we know or think about the project right now, it's different than what we'll think about it in September. So in our spending time with them, we talk and we exchange our impressions, but what we want to write a final analysis of it in an essay format, because we think there's also a value in that. There's also a value in making room for those arguments to take place in paper and on the screen in a longer format.
Yeah, and I also think that the end result might be something that is not just one argument or one judgment, but it will probably involve a series of qualified judgments, or I mean, like conflicting voices too. Even the two of us, in terms of what we think about the project.
I just want to say that I love the idea of the two-headed critic. Like, I think that there should only ever be two-headed critics for social practice. Like, there should be two or more. When two or more are gathered, that's what the critics should be. But I think the thing about the social media critique or instant response, first off, I'm like a really slow thinker. I really am. Like, I have a gut sense this really disturbs me. It's not exactly what it disturbed me about the last one I saw that looked like this. It takes me a while to process. And I also feel like people really do things nobody does anything, like, especially if it's politically engaged, nobody does anything to, like, offend, well, I'm just not going to say anything like that. I give people the benefit of the doubt. Like, I really do. Like, that's my first reaction. So I want to give them about as much time as I can before I'm really sure that I need to judge it. I also think that I don't do that. Like, I'm not the Facebook critic at all, and I don't think I ever will be. Partly because I like to lurk too much, but also it's a soundbite, and the things we don't need more sound bites with respect to any of these issues. There are enough circulating, and I don't know. I was being sort of genuine about the thing about the takedown about Mark. Like, I don't know how many more takedowns we need in terms of people on the left. I really don't. I mean, there are some. I mean. I want to take that one back too, but there is a kind of thing. There was a big when we started 16 Beaver, one of the biggest things we talked about was getting beyond oppositional practice, and I think there's the idea around criticism is that too. It's like beyond oppositional criticism. But there are moments when I don't want to be beyond anything, but I just feel like it's sound bites. It's dangerous, and these things need some time to percolate. But I do wonder about, like, there needs to be all different kinds of rhythms in the way that we write and circulate things.
I'm kind of like interested in it in the sense that we want people talking about it.
No. I mean, I'm not saying like
no, totally. But in the thought of like expanding it and making art criticism in some way accessible to a broader audience, that's totally a way that it can happen in small senses that can pull people in closer.
Yeah.
But I'm also, that kind of like, am I an attendee or am I a critic? Am I an attendee or am I a curator right now? And I'm like always everything.
Yeah. Hyphen.
So every response is a critical response, no matter what. So yeah, I was just interested in how you maybe think about that for yourself.
I think that many times, and I've done it myself in the past, I've been a Facebook critic in the past, and many times we fall into the replication of what we see or replication of the immediate impression we get of a project. And some things just take time to be understood. Some things take conversations to be understood. And Twitter and Facebook and blogs are great in calling attention and in raising noise about an issue, but if our interest here with the journal is to really getting to understand what's underneath the surface, we need time and we need resources and we need hours of driving, and that doesn't translate in a Facebook post easily.
I mean, I think it works on all different levels. Breaking it down a little bit, for me personally, I would say that within this talk, it wasn't framed as such, but like for me, I added a final sentence on my project at the end of this conference because I felt like, the conference is framed as place and revolution, and I haven't seen everything or experienced everything, but in my path through it, I never heard the word revolution brought up, and so my small soundbite, like, critic hat as presenter hat as whatever, it was, well, I'm going to say it, like that was a moment of criticism. It's not announced as such, but so I think that it happens at different times and in different ways. There are criticisms that exist only from one person to another. There are criticisms that do happen on social media, and there's criticism that happens over 180 hours or however long that like your process takes, and they can be valuable, but I think that, for myself, that I feel like if I speak, I am speaking with an understanding that it could be taken as criticism. It could be taken as, I can't just like totally casually throw it out and not expect to have to like stand behind that. Like, you're years later standing behind something that you wrote, and, you have to do that now with a tweet or with a Facebook post. And so it's an awareness, like, I go through my mind of, like, do I believe it? Do I stand behind it? Will I fight for this? Will I defend it later? And, I think that can happen in all different forms, personally.
I just wanted to say briefly in regards to, I think it was Abby's question about communities. So the blog that I'm with, at City, we're a nonprofit, and in terms of, like, just putting stuff out on the internet, we found like the easiest way to build communities is through the people around you. Like, so we're in an artist building, so we have public programs that are related to the activist causes that we're interested in. We get community board meetings. We partner with other art organizations and not art organizations. And it's like the simplest, on the ground way of making community in the digital age, but it still works. So, and I think there's a lot of organizations doing that too. Like Bird Away in Atlanta is one, Pelican Bomb in New Orleans. They're all online publications with public side too. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, thanks. Great panel. Really, I think one of the best so far. I've been thinking a little bit as you've been talking about hyperallergic and the e-flux art and education things. I get 8 million of, but that being said, hyperallergic had some of the most well-respected articles of last year, and when my 30-year-old brother said, "You gotta check out this really cool underground blog," I'm like, "Dude, I've been following that for like 4 years." But and he's a designer, even not exactly. But it's just struck me that how quickly the accessibility issue comes up. And so I just kind of had a question. Could you talk a little bit more about the dissemination? Where are you going? How far do you plan to take it? Because I would love to see more stuff than just like on Facebook and Twitter and Tumblr. I'm constantly sharing all the time. because it's just not out there. You know, there's just not that much written except, and if I get another suggestion to read Claire Bishop again, I might just but that being said, could you talk to, it's very California centered. I'm sure there's lots of other things. Maybe you could just talk about that, because I know Grant's there. But, you know, what about the internationalization of this practice? Because this is still very American-led, and there's so much going on in Europe and obviously Ireland, but you know, obviously it's Africa. It's just really. I just wanted to hear a little bit more about how you're internationalizing.
We are going to have to keep this brief and wrap up. We're at time.
Okay. So yeah, we're going to end with this response, which is Field is an academic journal. It's not like we're really excited about all of these amazing formats that are alternative forms of writing, but in the end, Field is an academic journal in responding to the Academy. We're trying to be as conscientious as we can of international voices. We learned a lot through our first issue about calls, and we have an open call out for our second issue, so we encourage you all to submit and tell your friends to submit.